in the office with Senator Charlie Laster. Senator Laster, thanks for the welcome.
Hey, good to have you all back. Finally get a little break that I can come in and talk with my constituents, so it's good to see you all out there.
And the break comes because we just finished a deadline week. Talk a little bit about that process over the last few weeks.
Last week was a deadline week for the Senate to hear all of the House bills, and also for the House to hear all the Senate bills that were sent over there. And if a bill was not voted out of that chamber by Thursday, then it's dead. So it's been a pretty hectic couple of weeks, but now we're taking a small breath before we head into the final month of the session.
Well, in last week, the thing that hit the headlines is really a hot and a hard topic that I'd like to discuss with you, just all around it. It's the abortion issue that actually, I guess it was passed by the Senate, passed by the House, sent to the governor vetoed it, and then what is the process and what actually has happened with the bill?
Well, the House, it was a House bill, and so when it was vetoed by the governor, it went back to the House first for consideration whether or not it should become law, notwithstanding the governor's veto, and the House voted overwhelmingly to do that, and then it has to go to the Senate, and the Senate vote was a lot closer. Because the bill had an emergency measure on it, the people to override the governor's veto had to get to 36 votes, and that's just exactly how many they got, 36 votes. So now that bill becomes law immediately because it had an emergency measure on it. Actually, there were two bills. Okay. And as the governor predicted, and probably we all knew around here, a lawsuit has been filed immediately. I think it was filed within a few hours, challenging the constitutionality of one or both of those laws.
Now, in the veto, I understand that the governor is able to give his opinion as to why, I guess, it would not be a good bill for him to sign into law. Did Governor Henry do something like that, and was there other information that came down to you guys?
Well, there is a veto message. Okay. And I couldn't recite that to you sure. Word for word, but the governor always issues a veto message, and he did in this situation. And basically he said that the law went too far, that it would be unconstitutional, in his opinion, would be found to be unconstitutional in court, and that the state would have to go through some expensive litigation in that process. And he also thought the bill went too far and required a medical procedure if a woman was seeking an abortion, and otherwise legal abortion still would require an ultrasound to be performed an hour before the procedure, and he thought that that was going too far. And so those were his reasons. And turns out he's right on one of them. The lawsuit's already been filed, and Oklahoma has one of the toughest sets of abortion laws in the United States, perhaps the toughest. And so in that regard, our laws will always be tested in court before they're deemed to be constitutional, because they come pretty close. It's a fine line what's constitutional and what's not, and the courts are there to decide that.
Well, when you say a lawsuit's been filed, who files those types of lawsuits when our legislature or our government, our elected officials decide, well, this is a good thing for the people?
Well, the citizens do. There's usually one or more citizens that act as plaintiffs in a case, and because those things are so complex and so expensive, they're usually financed by a nonprofit group or an advocacy group that advocates for a position. So in this situation, it would be one of the pro-choice groups that is willing to step forward and foot the bill for attorneys and expenses. But usually it's one or more citizens that actually are the named plaintiffs. I haven't studied this case yet.
Sure.
It was just filed yesterday, and
Okay.
I haven't looked at it. But that's usually what happens.
Well, it's interesting because that's another case of citizens becoming involved in their government. Not only do we elect our officials, I guess throughout the entire process, we can all engage with impact.
That's right. They can, and not we've talked about it a lot about how important it is for citizens to make their voices heard to their legislators. But citizens can also take part as advocates for or against certain legislation, and there are usually groups that they can join together and pool their resources and take a stand for or against a particular item of legislation. And that's what has happened here.
That's really interesting in the process it seems like that one is running the full gamut. Could it go any further?
It'll probably go all the way through the court system before we'll get an answer. That same law, if you will, was previously ruled to be unconstitutional by a court because the authors of that bill joined more than one subject together in one bill, and it was deemed unconstitutional because we're only supposed to put one subject in one bill. When that occurred, the authors of the measures then split them up into, I think, about 4 bills.
Okay.
And ran them as individual bills. But still, now the merits of the laws, not just the procedure, but the merits of the laws will be determined in court whether they're constitutional or not.
And then, of course, in an economic time like this for the state, the government acts as individuals. There has to be money to be able to litigate.
And that's one of the problems we're seeing this year. There seem to be, in my opinion, too many bills that make it through this process that are probably unconstitutional, and that means that there's going to be that much more litigation. We have too many examples of bills that are destined to go into court and be ruled whether they're constitutional or not because they're really on the edge, and I hate to see that. I think that legislators do have a duty to not pass bills that are obviously unconstitutional. There are some legislators out here that just kind of throw their hands up and say, well, it's not for me to decide whether it's constitutional or not. That'll be decided in the courts. I don't look at it that way. I think that it's irresponsible for the legislature to pass bills time and time again that are probably unconstitutional just to throw it into the court's lap, because it's very expensive and time-consuming for the state to go down that path.
Just off the cuff, and this is going to be a tough question, I know, but when you talk about litigation like that in the past, in the history of litigation like that, are there numbers that the taxpayers possibly could hear that we pay each year, or we pay or have paid, in order to really get a grasp on what kind of costs we're looking at for things like that?
Oh, hundreds of thousands of dollars, probably over the years into the millions of dollars that have been expended in defending lawsuits, and especially when you have, for example, the Republican leadership out here says that they don't want to use the Attorney General to challenge some of the national health reform bill. Well, that means lawyers are going to have to be hired, and it's expensive. And even when we use the Attorney General's office, the taxpayers, they foot that bill because those lawyers that work for the Attorney General, and there are many of them, they have to get paid. And so it is, over the years, into 7 figures.
Wow. Well, it's all part of our process and the process of government. We invite you, as I know Senator Laster does, to communicate with the offices of all of our representatives. Senator Laster, thank you very much again for talking about a tough topic.
Okay. Easy topics, tough topics. We'll talk about them all. It's good to see you all.
Thank you very much, Charles.
All right.